Hello, true crimerers. Listen, are you babysitting anytime soon? Maybe you're going to be house sitting for a friend who's going out of town. If you are, you may not want to watch this video. You see, because this is another TikTok compilation video. I still have so many more videos to bring over here before they give me the old Rudy boot from the old tickly talk tick. Stop it. But anyway, these are 10 stories of all true. Every last one of them is definitely true, especially the last one. Very true. Why'd you wink? That was weird. Anyway, these are 10 stories where murders took place while someone was babysitting, house sitting, something along those lines. So, without further ado, here are 10 stories, all of them definitely 1000% true. Viewer discretion is advised. Hello, true crimerers. In honor of the film Halloween throughout the month of October, I will also talk about murdered babysitters. And today we start with Janett Christman. This story takes place in the town of Columbia, Montana, March 18th, 1950. A cold, windy, and rainy night. At a local school, there was an 8th grade party going on, but one classmate could not attend. 13-year-old Janett Christman, because she would be babysitting for the Romack family that evening. She needed the extra bit of cash to pay for a suit she had purchased. At 7:50 p.m. that night, the Romack couple left their 3-year-old son Greg in the care of Janett. At 10:35 p.m., Officer Roy McCowan would receive a phone call. There was a girl screaming bloody murder on the other side. The sounds of a struggle, and finally the distant scream of the words, "Come quick," and then the call was dropped. At 1:35 a.m., the Romacks arrived back home. The blinds were open, the porch light illuminated, the front and back doors both left unlocked, and a window was broken open. When the couple walked into their home, they would find the body of Janett Christman. Lying next to their piano, her skirt lifted up to her face, the house in disarray because there was a struggle. Janett fought for her life, a fight she sadly would lose. She had puncture wounds all over her body that looked to be from some sort of mechanical pencil or some very small metal object. She had scratch marks all over her face, and she had a cord that was ripped off of an iron wrapped around her throat. She was strangled to death. The child was fine. The police would find bloody fingerprints, they found shoe impressions, and they believed the killer was already in the house when Janett arrived, waiting for his opportune moment to strike. The only genuine suspect they had was a man named Robert Muller, a friend of the Romack family. The Romack wife felt very uncomfortable by this man, and the father told the police that Muller at one point said he admired the figure of Janett Christman, saying she had a well-developed form. He also knew she would be babysitting for them that night, and he was known to always have a mechanical pencil on him, but they could never ever pin it on him, and the case of the babysitter with the killer already in the house has never been solved. Good night! Hello, true crimerers. This is the case of Cassie Jo Stoddart, sometimes referred to as the Scream Murder. Viewer discretion is advised. Pictured behind me is the home of 17-year-old Cassie Stoddart's aunt and uncle, Allison and Frank Contreras. On the night of September 22nd, 2006, Cassie was at the home house sitting for them. That evening, around 6 p.m., Cassie's boyfriend, Matt Beckham, came over to watch a movie. Joining the couple was their fellow Pocatello High School classmates, Tori Michael Adamsick and Brian Lee Draper, both age 16. They would end up watching the movie Kill Bill Volume 2. Before the movie started, Cassie had given the boys a tour of the house, including the basement. When they were in the basement, Brian Draper unlocked the basement door, without Cassie noticing. Before the movie could end, Brian and Tori left the house saying they wanted to go see a movie at a movie theater instead. Later that evening, there would be a sudden power outage in the house. This understandably made Cassie a little scared. So Matt called home and said, "Hey, can I stay over with Cassie?" His mom said no, but you can have her come over here. And Cassie said, "No, I need to stay here because this is what they hired me to do." Then suddenly the power came back on. And then around 10:30 p.m. that evening, Matt left Cassie alone in the house. And then a real-life scary movie took place. You see, because hiding down in the basement this entire time was Brian and Tori. They turned the power off deliberately, hoping to lure Cassie downstairs, but it didn't work. And when they heard Matt leave, they then turned the power back off. Because Brian and Tori, well, they had a plan.
We got our victim, and sad as it may be, she's our friend. But you know what? We all have to make sacrifices. Our first victim is going to be Cassie Stoddart. She's going to be alone in a big, dark house.
You see, the two boys would be planning this murder for some time. You can see longer versions of these videos online. These tapes would later be helped to prove their first-degree murder. They even have video of Cassie Jo at school. The two boys climbed the stairs of the basement into the darkened house. Draper had a dagger, and Adamsick had a hunting knife. They would slam cabinets and doors to scare Cassie when they snuck up on her while she was on the couch, and they stabbed her 30 times. She was alive for at least 12 of them. Draper was inspired by the Columbine shooters. Adamsick would say he was inspired by the Scream movies. The boys would try to blame each other, but none of that shit would work. There was plenty of video evidence, which they tried to bury. Oh, they wore creepy masks too. They both were found guilty, and were sentenced to life without parole. She was supposed to babysit that night, but then she just vanished. Hello, true crimerers. This is the case of Laurie Jean Lloyd. Viewer discretion is advised. Laurie was born on October 27th, 1962, and she lived in Kettering, Ohio. By the time this story takes place, Laurie is about 14 years old. Even at a young age, she allegedly had some issues with the law. She had apparently been arrested a couple of times. She had attempted to run away a few times before. She had also attempted to end her own life. Now, in all the instances where she got in trouble or she ran away, she always came back. She always alerted her family. Her birth father lived in California, and there's also the rumors that she really wanted to see her dad or be with her dad. So, with all of that being said, on the night of February 11th, 1976, she was supposed to be babysitting her nephew, and over at the house, she had a friend with her. Now, that night, Laurie's mom would drop off a pizza for the three of them to eat, and when she did so, she said, goodbye to Laurie. Laurie seemed happy, she was smiling, and everything just seemed normal. A few hours later, Laurie's mom got back to the house in order to pick up Laurie and the friend, I believe. But when she got there, Laurie was gone. Her friend and her 2-year-old nephew were both asleep. This is just like a family photo. The friend said that Laurie was supposed to go down to the convenience store to get a pack of cigarettes, I guess. So the mom would go to the convenience store. They said Laurie was never here. She never got in here. All of Laurie's personal belongings were left at the house. She brought nothing with her, which in all the time she ran away, she always brought a bunch of things with her. The family began to search along with police, but they really came up with nothing. There was a rumor that a friend said that Laurie planned to meet a boy that night in order to take her to California to see her dad. But they were able to confirm that her dad hadn't seen her. There was no communication that Laurie was supposed to do this. They even went to California and no one could find her there. On April 17th, 1976, the body of a teenage girl was found. She had only ever been identified as the Grant County Jane Doe, and this is an image of her. In 2016, it was revealed that through dental records, that the Jane Doe was likely that of Laurie Lloyd. The authorities have never officially confirmed it, but the family believes that it is her. Her cause of death, though, is unknown, and to this day, it is still a mystery. Hello, true crimerers. This is the case of 27-year-old Edward Coolidge. 27, and I'm the fucking Pope. Viewer discretion is advised. Pictured here was 18-year-old Sandra Valade, and she lived in Manchester, New Hampshire. On the afternoon of February 1st, 1960, she got off work. She then went to the library. She then went to the YMCA to do some swimming. She then saw a movie, which got out sometime around 9:15 that night. She was using the bus system, and so her final bus dropped her off, and then she would walk 1 more mile to her home. But she never made it to her home. So she was very quickly reported missing, but sadly, 9 days later, her body was disposed of in a snow ditch. She was sexually assaulted, her throat was cut, and she had been shot with a .22 caliber weapon. Unfortunately, police never had any leads, they never got any tips, they never had any witnesses, there was no evidence. So this case just went unsolved. This was 14-year-old Pamela Mason, who also lived in Manchester, New Hampshire. She really wanted to try out babysitting, so she put out an ad, and one day she got a call from a man saying that he wanted to employ her babysitting services, and the man offered to pick her up and bring her to his home. Her parents were like, okay, but only if you bring your wife with you. When he got to the house, his wife wasn't in the car, but her parents said, after talking to the man, said, okay, that's fine, go ahead. But Pamela Mason never got home. As a matter of fact, she never made it to her babysitting job because the man who picked her up wasn't looking for one. 8 days later, her body was found dumped in a snowbank as well. She was sexually assaulted and she had been shot with a .22 caliber weapon. This was in January of 1964, so it was 4 years after Sandra Valade's murder, and her body was found only 1.5 to 2 miles away from where Sandra was found. Police would quickly link the two, and they determined that the .22 caliber bullet from both of those murders were fired from the same gun. Shortly after Pamela's murder, this woman here, Rena Paquette, she said she knew who was responsible for the murder of both Sandra and Pamela, and she was going to go to authorities. But on February 3rd, 1964, just a couple of weeks after the murder of Pamela, she was found inside of her barn, and she was lit on fire. Authorities ruled it a self-unaliving, which is just asinine. Her family was like, she had to have been murdered. How? She didn't light herself on fire. I mean, not to say it's impossible, but that seems like a really bad way to do it. At any rate, police were questioning people in the vicinity of where Pamela was murdered, and that's how they came across, again, 27-year-old Edward Coolidge. I'm not buying the 27. He looks like a retired talk show host. At any rate, they interviewed him, and apparently he threw up some red flags because he was allegedly in the area. He said his car got stuck in a snowbank near where Pamela was found. His vehicle would match the description of the vehicle that Pamela's parents gave. They did not get a great look at the man in the car, however, because he never got out of the car. Police would discover that he owned a .22 caliber rifle. He actually had it in his car. So police were able to confiscate it, and they tested it, the ballistics, and it was the gun that fired the .22 caliber bullet that was found inside of Pamela, and it also matched the one found in Sandra. Edward said, that's impossible because the gun that I have, I won that in 1961, and that was a year after Sandra's death. But the rifle he had was the same rifle that fired the shot, so it is what it is, I guess. So he would be arrested for and charged with the murder of Pamela Mason. And he would end up being convicted of that murder and then sentenced to life in prison without parole. They did not prosecute him for the murder of Sandra Vlade, for reasons, I guess, because they didn't have enough evidence. You know, the whole rifle situation got a little tricky, I guess. Now, in 1971, he actually managed to appeal his case, his conviction, to the Supreme Court. He was awarded a new trial because the search warrant for his vehicle that led to the gun, well, it was signed by the Attorney General, who would then end up becoming the prosecutor of his case. So they threw out the conviction and they had to retry him. But before they would go through a trial, he would plead guilty to second-degree murder for the murder of Pamela Mason, and he was sentenced to 25 to 40 years. In March of 1991, he was released from prison. In 1991, they would exhume the body of Miss Paquette, who they said she did it to herself. But the new examination of her body, they switched that to murder. But no one's been charged in her case. And no one was ever charged for Sandra's murder. But I bet it was this teenager who did it. Hello, true crimerers. It is time for another babysitter case. And it is the story of Lisa Story and Robin Cornell. Viewer discretion is advised. On the evening of May 10th, 1990, Robin Cornell was being babysat by her mother's roommate, Lisa Story. Her mother, Jan Cornell, was over at her boyfriend's place watching a TV show. Now, Jan accidentally fell asleep at her boyfriend's house, and when she woke up, it was roughly 4 in the morning, and she was super late for a shift at a hospital she worked at. So she rushed out of her boyfriend's apartment and went back to her home. When Jan got back to her home, she realized that both locks of the front door were locked. Jan had told Lisa Story to not lock the bottom lock because she didn't have a key for that one. Lisa had literally just moved in the day before. She was a co-worker with Jan at the hospital. Now, while Jan was at the front door, she heard footsteps inside the house. She assumed it was Lisa or possibly Robin getting up to open the door for her, but no one ever came. So Jan swung around back to the back sliding door, and it was wide open, and she kind of went into panic mode. That back door would lead into the kitchen, and when Jan walked into the kitchen, she saw on the table and on an ironing board a whole bunch of photos that she had. They were all like meticulously arranged as if someone was looking through them, but Jan hadn't put them out there. Jan just felt in her stomach, something is wrong here. So in panic mode, she's screaming Robin's name. She runs up to her bedroom where she finds the body of her 11-year-old daughter. She was cold to the touch, and her nightgown was pulled up to her neck. She called police right away, and then police would find the body of Lisa Story in her bedroom, and she was sprawled out in a position that implied that she was sexually assaulted. It would be determined by the coroner that both girls were killed by suffocation, likely by a pillow over the face. They determined that they were sexually assaulted after they were deceased. Police searched the house and they found a keychain that didn't belong to anyone in the house, and that was in Lisa Story's bedroom. They found a pair of white socks on a dining room chair that didn't belong to anyone in the house. They even found evidence that he took a shower in the home. They also had male DNA left behind on the girls. Wow, that's a face. Jesus. It wouldn't be until 26 years later when DNA finally had a match. It was this man, Joseph Zeeler. His DNA was finally on record because he was arrested for shooting his 25-year-old son, who survived. Therefore, he was required to submit DNA. It was a lucky hit. This was in 2016. Believe it or not, he is still awaiting trial. It's been 5 years. A young babysitter would last speak to her mother at 10 p.m., and by midnight, she had been slaughtered. Hello, true crimerers. This is the case of Karen Slattery. Viewer discretion is advised. Karen was born on September 18th, 1969 in Florida. Yep, we're going to Florida again. By 1984, at the age of 14, she was already known to be a local babysitter. She was a beloved babysitter and she loved doing it. On March 24th, 1984, Karen would babysit for the last time. William and Carolyn Helm lived in a little cul-de-sac in Delray Beach, Florida, and they were offered the services of Karen Slattery for the night. The couple had 2 children, aged 2 and 7, and the mother and father were only going to be gone for a few hours. Karen would speak to her mother on the phone sometime around 10 p.m. on March 24th. She said everything was going great, the kids were sound asleep at that point, and she was really just waiting for the mother and father to get home. So they hung up the phone, and that would be the last time the mother would ever hear from her young daughter again. When William and Carolyn got home sometime a little after midnight, both of the kids were still sound asleep in their beds. Thankfully, they were safe and they were unharmed. But the same could not be said for 14-year-old Karen Slattery. In the living room was Karen's hairbrush, her shoes, and her dental retainer. They were on the ground by the television. In the kitchen was a massive pool of blood with what appeared to be drag marks of someone being dragged through their own blood. And those drag marks led to the master bedroom. The parents were too afraid to go in there, so they called police. And when police got there and walked in, they found the body of Karen. She was stabbed 18 different times. The stab wounds were in her neck, her back, and in her throat. And it was more than evident that she had also been sexually assaulted. Police quickly found how the killer got in the house. There was a window with the screen cut open. There was a bloody footprint in the kitchen that had to have been left by the killer. They also found shoe impressions in a flower bed outside the house. They also found fingerprints which did not match anyone who lived in the home or Karen. They also found unknown DNA. But in the 80s, of course, it was very difficult to match that DNA to anyone. The case went cold for a couple of months. On May 29, 1984, a man by the name of Dwayne Owen was arrested on burglary charges. The burglary that he did was very similar to what happened at the house that Karen Slattery was murdered. So they got a foot impression from Dwayne, and it matched. He was in the home when Karen Slattery was killed, and he confessed. He also confessed to another murder. He was convicted of both and was sentenced to death. Her night started by babysitting her nieces, but it would end in a horrific murder. Hello, true crimerers. This is another episode of the Babysitter Murders. Pictured here was 14-year-old Suzie Bombardier. She actually preferred to go by Suzie. On June 21st, 1980, Suzie was at her sister's apartment babysitting her 2 nieces. It was actually the very first night of summer. She had literally just finished the 8th grade. Her sister would get home around 4 a.m. the following morning. Normally when Suzie stayed over to watch the girls, she would fall asleep on the couch, but when her sister walked in, she wasn't on the couch. She assumed she just fell asleep with the kids. So the sister just went to bed. When she woke up, she noticed Suzie still wasn't there. The sister also noticed that Suzie's backpack was still in the apartment, and when she phoned her parents, she wasn't there either. Suzie was missing. Her father suspected that she was kidnapped, and likely by someone she knew and trusted because there was no sign of forced entry in the apartment. No sign of a struggle. Everything looked normal. Police would question some of Suzie's friends. Suzie's best friend said that around 1:30 in the morning, they were actually speaking to each other on the phone. She could hear Saturday Night Live playing in the background. Then Suzie said, "You know what, I'm beat, I need to go to bed," and then they hung up. Unfortunately, 5 days later, Suzie's nude body would be found floating in the San Joaquin River in Antioch. The autopsy would reveal that she was sexually assaulted, and there were traces of DNA left inside of her. Oh God, I hate saying that. It's so disturbing. I don't get it. I don't get how people can do this. And she also had a stab wound that went directly into her heart. Her heart was punctured, and that was her cause of death. There was very few suspects. They suspected a slightly older boy who she was dating, but he was cleared. Jesus. At one point, they even thought that Sloth from Goonies' younger and less attractive brother, Henry Lee Lucas, they thought, oh, maybe he did it. But he was cleared too. The case went cold for 37 years. When the DNA that was found on her finally matched, and it matched 63-year-old Mitchell Lynn Bacon, who appears to have done a few diabetes commercials. This was Mitchell around that time, what he looked like. He actually knew the family. He actually dated the sister. So Suzie knew him, which is why it was so easy for him to get into the apartment. Police actually gave him a polygraph way back at the beginning, but he actually passed. Never rely on a polygraph. He was charged with kidnapping, ugh, your mustache is gross, sexual assault, oral copulation, and murder. He had actually served time in prison for several other crimes, but his trial has yet to begin for this case. House sitting for your friends while they travel for the holidays is something we've all probably done. Unfortunately, sometimes it can end in murder. Hello, true crimerers. This is the case of Valerie Graves. Viewer discretion is advised. I will be lumping in house-sitting murders along with my babysitter murders series. Valerie had 2 adult children and she was also a grandmother. In the 10 years prior leading up to this story, she was actually living in Scotland, where she owned a gallery and craft studio. She had moved back to the West Sussex area of England because her 87-year-old mother needed to be looked after. Christmas season 2013. Valerie, along with some of her family, were house-sitting for a friend of theirs in Smuggler's Lane, which is in Bosham, part of West Sussex, England. And this was quite a house. It was considered a luxury property. It was worth about 1.6 million British pounds. So Valerie and her immediate family members were in the house. Valerie's birthday was actually Christmas Day, and they celebrated. It was a great time. Little did they know, unfortunately, that this would be the last time Valerie would celebrate her birthday. On the morning of December 30th, 2013, Valerie's 60-year-old sister Janett had gone downstairs to make some tea. Also present in the house that day was their 87-year-old mother Eileen and Janett's 59-year-old partner Nigel. Janett went to go take tea to Valerie, and she came across a gruesome sight. Valerie was found bludgeoned to death. She had many head and facial wounds. Later on, the authorities would equate her wounds to like being in a car crash. They said it was a very frenzied assault. This immediately became a whodunit. Crime scene investigators swept the entire house and all of the properties surrounding it. The family who was there were all cleared. They did uncover the murder weapon a little bit down the road. The killer had disposed of the claw hammer he used to bash her head in. Valerie was in the only bedroom downstairs while the rest of her family was upstairs, and none of them heard anything. Keep in mind, it's a big house. Investigators were working their butts off to solve this case. They interviewed close to 10,000 people. They got DNA from thousands of people, but it wouldn't be until 2019 when authorities got information from Romania, when a man by the name of Cristian Sabu was basically turned into them by the Romanian authorities, claiming they had information that he was the one to have committed the murder. And he would confess. He said he was told that house had a lot of valuables, so he went to rob it, not thinking anyone was there. Valerie woke up and surprised him, so he killed her. He pled guilty. He got 24 years to life. This scarf would be used to strangle and murder a 12-year-old girl in Maine. Hello, true crimerers. This is the case of Sarah Cherry. Viewer discretion is advised. 12-year-old Sarah lived with her family in Bodenham, Maine, and she was a babysitter in the area. It's not the best picture in the world, but on July 6, 1988, Sarah would be babysitting at this home. It's in a very rural location, pretty secluded. When the parents of the child who was being babysat by Sarah that day, when they got home, the baby was there, safe and sound, but Sarah was gone. You know, they searched the house top to bottom. They looked in the woods in the nearby area. No sign of her. So they notified her parents. And obviously the parents went into panic mode. They reported her missing immediately and they all began searching everywhere for her. Over the course of 2 days, they would search all of the heavily wooded areas of Bodenham. They actually conducted over 100 different searches in just 2 days. And on that second day, right here in this location, they would find the remains of the 12-year-old girl. She was completely covered up by twigs and brush and leaves, so it was easy to, I guess, miss her over the course of a couple of days of searches. She had this scarf wrapped around her neck. It was clearly used to strangle her. This rope was wrapped around both of her wrists, and she was also stabbed and also sexually violated with sticks. About 100 yards away from where they found her body, they saw this truck. That truck belonged to a man, 31-year-old Dennis DeShane. The interesting coincidence about this: on the driveway of the house where Sarah was babysitting, they found papers kind of spread loosely around. Papers that had Dennis DeShane's name on it. The rope and the scarf, they came from Dennis DeShane's truck. He openly let police search his vehicle to see if they could find any trace evidence of Sarah, because her body was found about 3 miles away from the house where she was babysitting. Not one trace of her was found in his truck. No hair, no skin, DNA, nothing. Under her fingernails, they did find skin cells. Obviously, she scratched her attacker. None of it matched Dennis. The DNA belonged to an unknown male. He thinks someone's framing him. Someone planted all that stuff to make it look like it was him. The day Sarah would have been killed, witnesses claim to have seen a couple of police officers in the area where she was eventually found. But ultimately, Dennis was convicted and sentenced to life in prison without parole. And he has lost all of his appeals. And they won't retest the DNA. Hello, true crimerers. It's time for another deadly Halloween. Viewer discretion is advised. On Halloween night in 1963, in a little suburb of Illinois, a 6-year-old child would do something evil. He would spy on his sister and her boyfriend making over-the-clothes whoopee, and then when the boyfriend left, the only 2 people left in the home would be teenager Judith Myers and her 6-year-old brother, Michael Wayne Myers. Michael would put on this creepy-ass clown mask, and yes, this is the actual one. This is a photo taken from that night. He would sneak up to his sister's room, and while she was combing her luscious blonde hair, he repeatedly stabbed her to death. He would then calmly walk out of the house when his parents arrived home, and they would have the most uncomfortable staring contest for what felt like 45 minutes. Legend says they are still staring at their little boy on the front lawn to this very day. Little Michael would then be committed to a mental institution called Smith's Grove, where he would be assigned to one of the world's worst child psychiatrists, Dr. Sam Loomis. Incredibly, 15 years later, Michael would escape the sanitarium. They believe that Michael killed a mechanic and stole his suit. He would then rob a store of a William Shatner mask, and then Mikey would have himself a little arts and crafts moment. He would paint the mask white to make it look foreboding. I hope William Shatner never found out about this. Now, Michael was getting around in a stolen vehicle that he stole from the sanitarium. At some point, he was, I guess, able to obtain his driver's license. Because quite honestly, he drove like a beast. While Michael was driving around town being a peeper creeper, he noticed a woman by the name of Laurie Strode. She had dropped off some keys to the house he used to live in, and I guess he thought she was hot, so he stalked her. He also took notice of her friends, the Ditzy twins, Annie Brackett, and Linda with a Y, Vanderklok. On Halloween night 1978, Laurie was babysitting Tommy Doyle. Annie was supposed to be babysitting Lindsay Wallace. But Annie wanted to go to Pound Town with her boyfriend instead, so she pawned her off on Laurie. That is when the rampage began. Oh, hey, what's up, man? Yep, up top. Michael Myers, wearing the world's breathiest mask, would go on a murder rampage. Before she ever got to go to Pleasure Town, USA, Annie was strangled to death. Linda was strangled with a cordless phone, and Linda's boyfriend, Bob, We Oughta Baby Eats a Boy Sims, he would be fish filleted into a wall. Myers then went after— Girl, look out behind you! He went after Laurie. Dr. Loomis saved the day, and he shot and killed Michael.